All right. Hey, Kim.
Hello, Arti.
Welcome to hour 12. This is great. We've been weaving all night for almost like 12 hours because this is hour 12, so we've finished 12 hours and it's been wonderful. I think we've had very rich discussions, and the best part about this Connectathon has been that every session just flowed into the other. I think we did a more mechanical work of stopping the recording and starting the recording, but let's just pick it up from where we left at the previous session. Yeah.
Sounds good.
Yeah. So we've been talking a lot about how inhuman human beings are being and how human they are wanting to be, right? And that huge gap is glaring in the face of all of us through the media channels, through our own anxieties, through our neighborhood stories or stories from relatives overseas if they're stuck in conflict zones, right? So one of the bigger pieces of this hour, in fact, the key piece of this hour, was decided right at the end last night because we were still figuring out what do we do in hour 12. And Tim and I, we had the good sense of landing to this idea of talking about energy systems. Because in the world that we have today, given the geopolitical conflict and wherever there's no conflict, there's at least an intention for conflict that's emerging. But all of this collectively is putting our energy systems, our energy infrastructure, our energy dispensation, distribution, and consumption. I mean, all of it is at stake right now, despite the fact that some of the more positive news is that it's going to get de-escalated. But the funny thing is that we might de-escalate, but what's happened already is going to bear impact in the next 5 to 6 months, and specifically impacting the food chain, food cycle. Because this has been the plantation season, this particular time of the year, and when fuels cut, fertilizers are cut, right? If fertilizers are cut, you do not plant. If you don't plant, you don't harvest. When you don't harvest, you don't get to eat. It's literally that simple. I mean, I couldn't have put it in any simpler words, right? So I think this hour, I would like us to, and I believe Dave is also going to join us back. And if you're lucky, we'll have some more people come in. But even if that doesn't happen, the thing is that we need to look at what has been, or rather, how are we engaging with energy as a system? And given this recent turbulence in the world, what are we seeing energy systems to become in the future? So I did a little, oh, hey, Dave, thank you for coming back. That was quick. So I sort of tried to put a visual to where we are, and I think it's just a one little slide. And so maybe we can just discuss and get a feel, get an understanding, get an impression of what any of us feel about it, right? So I'm going to start sharing my screen. Let me see. It's morning from India, and therefore it's morning on my screen too. So we're going to talk about the future of energy in a fragmenting world, right? And I have a lot of pop-ups on my screen. Let me just shut this down, and here it goes. Yeah. So Dave, not sure if you caught on to what we were talking about while the camera and you were off the screen, but we're talking about what has been our dependence on the energy systems and how have they become legacy energy systems as of today, and what is the threat and what is the ideal or the emerging pathway in terms of energy transition, both in terms of sources of energy and also the infrastructure of energy in the world. So um, let's quickly sort of take a look at the energy system status quo as of today. So, and I mentioned this in one of the previous sessions also, that what's happening is that the energy security is becoming bigger than climate goals. And when that's happening, we know for a fact Europe's gone back to coal. Many other economies are looking at cheaper fuel sources and immediate fuel sources. But again, it's not been mainstreamed as an alternate source of energy in those countries. So, of course, there's a huge gap. The other thing is that, of course, there's been a huge momentum as far as renewable energy sources are concerned and renewable energy technologies are concerned. Despite that, the value chains remain extremely uneven. So that also means that, our pricing is not sort of levelized. Is I think that's a term that's used in the sector normally. And when this is happening, we are also seeing, because of the kind of seasoning that's happened in terms of managing energy as a product in the world, our habits are really poor with that, right? So even moving into the renewable sector, we are seeing a lot of challenges that are largely driven by lack of intention, right? So when you look at how a renewable sector is getting funded, yes, there are some promising figures in some parts of the world, but we know that this is not a replacement. And we're calling for a replacement given this geopolitical crisis has just shut the shop on everybody. We're also looking at the formation of geopolitical blocs. When that's happening, that's a clear um, story of us and them. And if that continues, we know that the people who already have a lot of power and control, it'll just get amplified for them, and people who do not, that continue sliding downward. However, there are certain countries in the world that are sort of breaking that rule as well. But this is clearly happening. So the world, in the context of energy, is dividing otherwise also into geopolitical blocks. Moving on, there's also a focus on uh, expediting nuclear as a source of energy in terms of powering industry, powering homes, and just going nuclear all over. And of course, we know a lot of story from history and even from recent speculation about how nuclear is viable, yes, but it also comes in with a lot of danger, right? And of course, we are expecting to move towards hybrid energy system. Now, this is the timeline that I've been able to sort of visualize based on what's going on in the world. And we've been talking for the last 11 hours about the need for reconnecting with ourselves. We've been talking a lot about love. We've been talking a lot about ancient wisdom. We've been talking about indigenous practices. We've been talking about a whole lot of stuff that's on the tender side of things. While that is important, while that is us, while that describes who we are, while that's also a collective aspiration across generations to be. Second. Sorry about that. While all of that is happening, when I look at this sector, which is literally at the center of our survival as of today, this has got nothing to do with what we've been talking about, and it has everything to do with what we've been talking about in equal measure. So I'd like to invite Kim, Dave, and Chakradhar also. So Chakri, good morning. Thank you for logging in. I'd like to invite you to reflect and possibly help all of us here, and whenever the recording's out, help everybody tie the story of what we are achieving in Connectathon and why this is at halftime. At hour 12, we're talking about energy. I would have honestly loved to talk about energy as a concept of, human beings, the energy that we carry, the energy that we exchange. But unfortunately, that's not something that is coinciding with, or it's sort of responding to the idea of energy crisis in the world. Yeah, somewhere in certain conversations it might, but for this hour particularly, I'd like to invite all of you, because we've all been together, to reflect a little bit on what's the reality around this emergence, this status quo.
Um,
Yeah.
so here I live in Taranaki.
Mhm.
Taranaki's economy was based on oil and gas and dairy farming. Oil and gas, oil used to seep out of our beaches here um, at one point, but it's been harder and harder to find. Um, and some of those companies have pulled out of here. Equally, the recognition that we need to transition away from dependencies on fossil fuels. And so permits weren't being granted, even if somebody did want to explore. Um, so there was geopolitics involved in that, um, because there was a lot more people focused on the environment, that were pushing to get away from fossil fuels and look at alternate energy systems. We have one of the main employers here is Methanex, which is processing LNG and pumping that through pipes. Another polluting um, industry, but one that pays well for the people that work there. So shortly after I moved here, about 4 or 5 years ago, we had a transition summit, and that was to look at transitioning to new economies and how we could take people from those traditional skills and look at hydrogen and solar and wind. So we've got wind farms out in the country, and we've got a little bit of solar on some households. Um, but now, with another change of direction and change of government, it's like, oh, we've got an energy crisis. Now we need to allow permits for more exploration, just as you're saying, and we need to spend $1 billion building an LNG port to
Mhm.
receive LNG from overseas. So again, we're going, instead of investing in a more distributed, like solar incentive type system and electrifying, because we're a country of natural gas and hydro dams and blah blah blah. We could be a lot more sustainable. We are doing the cheap trick of let's just import more of this stuff at our cost, and to appeal to the oil and gas companies and the mining companies, opening up coal mines again in
Mhm.
pristine environments. We are bending over to their needs by A, reducing the tax that they might pay to almost nothing, while taking ownership of any environmental harm that we as citizens would pay. So this is the environment that we face. So it's interesting what you're saying about this movement to, oh, we've got an energy crisis. What's the cheapest form of energy? It doesn't matter about climate change. A few months ago, just to finish up, I had a couple of friends here, and Bob was the environmental lawyer that drafted the Clean Air Act for the US government. And when he came to New Zealand, clean and green New Zealand, he said, this place smells of petrol because we didn't have the same emission standards on vehicles that he put through. Now, of course, Trump has just removed all those standards to make cars cheaper, or car production cheaper. So, yeah, we're taking a big step backwards. I don't know what we do about it.
Yeah. Yeah. So you made a very interesting point that cheaper energy sources because well, yeah, it's a crisis. So there's money to be made when you just import, right? There's a whole chain of people who earn from these imports. despite the fact that the taxpayer gets penalized for those high prices of import. But essentially, there's a nexus of facilitators who make money in the bargain. So I think these are some of the systems that are being opened up and understood a lot deeper than before, and specifically with the given state of affairs and how the world is coming to terms with the idea that energy is not somebody else's business. Because if I cannot run the appliances in my house, it has to become my business then, because I'm not able to run the appliances in my household. If I'm not able to run my factory in a small place, then I have to figure something out, because I know that it is a crisis and the governments will do only so much because it's a geopolitically influenced situation. So a singular government is not the only one to be held responsible in such a scenario. Now, and I'm just going to cover this aspect so that we get into a more solid discussion based on what's emerging. What's emerging is, well, the systems of the future as we see it together, because this is not new information any longer. One is definitely the need for decentralized microgrids. So when we're looking at decentralized microgrids, to me, based on the last 11 hours, this is where we become a community. Right? So when you look at microgrid systems, it's a smaller number of population that is sort of they are mobilized based on smaller energy systems, not spread out, not national level grids. The second thing that I'm seeing happen is that energy has to emerge as a concept of public good instead of just a product. So that productification of energy is why people are not able to align with the idea. I mean, there are young people who don't know how to make electricity if they get stuck. So our understanding of energy as a system has to become more mainstream, so that this is another place where I think we become, we leverage the power of communities. And this is just based on the conversation we've had in the last 11 hours. So this energy systems in the world, or energy crisis in the world, just becomes one lens for us to test the potential of what we've been talking about for the last 11 hours to literally make a difference. Not just in softer spaces, but also in the hard spaces, right? So just transition framework. What is the framework around just transition? I think that's already in the trash can. So we need possibly a new just transitions framework. When you look at just transition, the first thing that I don't understand about just transition is carbon credits or carbon offsets, right? So that is a system that I just don't understand. Unfortunately, there's an entire industry that's become, pretty well fed on the idea of carbon credits. So how do you, to be able to move from being a high emission producer to, let's say, a medium to a low, you've got to align yourself with a lot of other protocols that are coming up, like scope 1, 2, and 3 targets, right? So which segment do we fall under? So the just transition framework has to be decided in tandem with the industry, with the populations that are utilizing energy at a household level, at a more institutional level, like schools, like hospitals, like hospitality, like mobility, all of these, right? So local manufacturing. So this is where we again become a community. Dave Smith, Dave and Kim, can you see? And Chakra, you've also been a part of our earlier discussions. Can you see how each of these things, if we were to just break it down into what could be the potential future of our energy systems, now do we see all of it coming alive?
Yes.
Right? These are the spaces. This is what I've been talking about for a very long time. I think this is the first time I've been able to put it in a visual, that this is how we need to sort of expand our tender thinking, our human sensibility in terms of improving the kind of institutions we are building or we are seeking to improve. Local manufacturing. I don't need need to even talk about this. There's so much of talent at a local level, and there's so much of understanding of needs at a local level. There's so much of information of what is available locally to be sort of manufactured, to fulfill local demands. And again, it's about becoming a community, and this becomes a binding factor for that community. We're looking at food, water, and energy. Yeah. So again, when we look at energy systems, yes, they consume a lot of water. Certain energy production, concepts use a lot of water, and then of course they also impact the food chain. So how does this sort of dance with each other? These three elements, because food and water, you can't go without that, right? So that's the other thing. Urban energy systems. I think this is the space where a lot of integration of I would say civic amenities, civic provisions, or access to certain institutions in a more urban setting. All of these have to converge into building an integrated urban energy system. So again, the urban lifestyle is extremely different from what we might have in the mountains or in certain non-urban or let's say semi-rural neighborhoods. The dynamics are very different, but it is the mega cities, it is the urban setting that actually puts a lot of pressure on the grid, on the whole capacity that the nation has to produce for any country. And then we're looking at behavior and efficiency. So when we look at behavior and efficiencies, again, there's such a huge gap between energy as a sector and populations that use energy from these large, gigantic systems. So that mismatch, that disconnect has to be bridged by way of that ownership, by way of that participation. But it is so complex that normal people feel too dumb to participate and say, hey, I own this. But there are possibilities. So we've got solar going, we've got hydrogen going, we've got wind energy, we've got other recycle, like there's a friend of mine who's doing recycling of multi-layered plastic into marine fuels, right? So, and he's an oil and gas guy, so he knows his stuff, right? So, and then we have community ownership. I think this is where it all, becomes in reality. So if you look at these two timelines, now I'd like to really open this to a discussion. Chakri and Michelle, hey Michelle, good to have you here. Didn't see you log in. Who else do we have? Got John as well. John, thank you for coming in. So let's hear from everybody. How do we feel about the status quo as we are seeing it, which is quite alarming, but right at the end, it's also showing a positive that we are aiming to become, a society with hybrid energy systems, but multiple sources of energy coming in, and it's going to be a whole fuel mix. And this is the potential future of our energy. So if you look at this, the current geopolitical situation, of course, it's like a complete hijack of the world order. But even if that were to come to rest, are we? Can we look forward to this kind of an integrated future coming in?
You make a really good point right at the start about the energy crisis, and because I look at what's happening in the Middle East and in Ukraine, particularly the Middle East, and apart from the craziness of it, the environmental damage it is doing when we are blowing these oil fields up and sinking ships into the sea, all of that sort of stuff, is that it's just gone crazy. And, while I mentioned before that we had established this region as a just transition region, that soon got dropped with the change of government. And what also got dropped was the subsidies on electrification of the transport system. Now that's come back to bite us in the bum because suddenly fuel costs have soared up. We have petrol stations that have run out of supply because of people panicking, and people wishing they had electric cars. I'm glad I bought an electric scooter. So conveying, so all of that just ticks boxes. they just to be try and be brief to let other people talk. The local manufacturing side of it is recognizing a one that we already have engineering talent that just
Yes.
needs to be realigned into other industries, other ways of doing things, and b we the cost of manufacture and tool sets has dramatically dropped. So, for instance, I helped establish a bioregion in another area, and the cost of the critical mass extractor to extract the plant terpenoids was had come down from $100,000 to $10,000. So suddenly it was something affordable for a community to manufacture something locally on a microgrid scale with 3D printers and printers that can and laser lathes that can work on a number of different planes, 4 or 5 different planes, allowing us to build very strong parts. It's all suddenly become they are they are environment they are changes. Like when there's a friend of mine who's an engineer, runs a lab at Hong Kong University. They print aircraft parts for Boeing 747s and whatnot. So when a plane needs to replace parts on a regular basis, they print these skeleton parts similar to what a bird would have. So the plane's actually getting stronger and lighter as they're replacing things because of the new tools.
Mm.
So I guess the point is that educating people on what is now possible and the cost point ratio
Yeah.
is a much easier conversation. I'll stop while I choke now.
Take a break. Yeah, I mean, this is the point, right? So when we look at this potential pathway, I think we've got our work pretty clearly cut out, at least this group, at least the group that's on Connectathon, because we are all invested in human development and human consciousness and building better future as an aspiration and maybe by what we do. I think this is exactly where our work lies. So if I were to look at urban energy systems as an idea that's worth sort of working on, I think Living Cities Earth should completely take this under their purview because they're designing fully integrated systems. They're looking at care as an idea across what's utilized at an urban level, how the urban setting is designed and how it thrives. So and there are so many people in our networks, with eco civilization, with everywhere else, people keep converging into Connectathon. Behavior and efficiencies. I mean, it's literally about writing what should be our next standardized code of conduct as human beings before that's outdated, right? So when we're looking at community ownership, I think it's a journey that has to be made, both in terms of the existing systems deciding to say, okay, let's start with microgrid, let's start with energy as public good, and then have the rest of the populations walk that path. But again, it becomes like a chicken and egg story. Who makes the first step? Is it the community or is it still the acting government? Who makes that first step to ensure that energy becomes public good?
So, Arti, I can share what's coming up for me as you keep asking questions, and I'm really like sensing into your visual, and I like it because there's different conversation points as I look at each icon. And the first thing is I like that you've covered up the golf course there, and I'm feeling behind that screen, it's being rewilded,
Yeah.
right? Because golf courses are, I didn't realize until like later in life how even though I've not been on them really, just what a drain they are. And for biodiversity, how many species, how many life
Yeah.
forces leave these places. So anyways, that's the first thing. The decentralized, I'm focusing on the energy systems of the future. Um, Decentralized microgrids, something I've learned, and again, this is on last few years, is a general public, we don't hear too much about this in the US, but at the same time, the federal officials some time ago were mandating that urban centers move to decentralized microgrids, like without letting anyone else know, like because of pending future problems. So that's been existing for a while. Um, the just transition framework, I might be thinking of this a little differently, but just from being in a lot of different dialogue circles and work circles and being aware of, friends in the Congo and the kids in the mines and all of the resources or earth, minerals that are seen as resources that have a huge cost to earth and to humans and to children. I just, for the green energy, it's like, I just wonder about that. Um, was in a circle with a wonderful person, Max Wilbert. He was one of the authors of Bright Green Lies, a book that came out that was really criticized. And I never would have read it. I don't like the title. But it turned out he was going to be speaking with our climate dialogue group. And John, who heads that group, came to a couple of our circles here today. And the book really takes aim at people who have been environmentalists for a long time, um, who it seemed to, the premise premise was that they had lost their way, because are they really doing things for Earth, actions for Earth? Or the question that stayed with me, is it really just to protect our very comfortable lifestyles? Because meanwhile, all kinds of things, that sounds good, still not in reality good. Something I love, though, the local manufacturing and the producing of things reminds me of cosmolocalism, right? To produce the heavy things where we are locally, connect and share information globally, we do online, and really be in presence in bioregioning. And I'm hearing, bioregioning come up a lot. And for me, that starts with the water, which we've also talked about today. Like where does the water come from? Where does it flow to? People around me have definitely forgotten for the most part, because I did. But now I don't know. Now it's like the aesthetics of it. The aesthetics of the bottom row here are really nice. And I know that kind of attracts me. People get attracted to different types of aesthetics. And in bioregioning here, some are very much into the survivalism. Things are going to fall apart. I listened last night to do you listen to the Great Simplification podcast at all? Nate Hagen's. Um,
Nope.
you
The
might want to
great.
do that. You might be, yeah, interested in that. This latest one is What to Do as the World Falls Apart, a framework for action. It's the first time there's been action, but it looks at energy. It's all about energy. And with the, I'll put the link in here up so that you see it. But the premise is that most humans were energy blind to how much energy that we use. Um, we are going to need to live a much more simple lifestyle. It just goes on and on and on and on. And some things that have come up over the months and that have to do with inner work and stabilizing our nervous system, all of these things that we've also talked about here today. Um, let's see, the food, water, and energy. Again, I love those. Localizing. Yes, supply chains can fall apart. And yes, we needed to transform our food systems anyways. I mean, in where I live, in Northeast Ohio, I learned that there are 15,000 farms, which is amazing. And I was wondering, so we have farmland here. If we ever need to feed people here, can we do it? And the answer is no, because 86% of what's grown on farms here in Northeast Ohio, it's for their crops to feed animals for human consumption. And then like 6% more is ethanol, corn for ethanol, and then a very, very small bit left that's used for human beings. And sure, we can change those things, but not overnight. And there's a nice movement to regenerate soil, to organic farming. So all of these things very much resonate with me, Artie. And let's see, behavior and efficiencies. I think that's what we were talking about today. I'm thinking of the behavior. I'm thinking the shifts, our shifts in consciousness. And community ownership, of course, the co-ops. Everyone has a stake.
Absolutely.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Kim. And that's such an important point, because one of my friends the other day was mentioning this to me, that if you want communities to become resilient in a time of crisis, don't put a water pump for community use. Make sure that you give them the air to water technology in every household. Yeah. Because when you look at community development, it does not necessarily mean that you share every resource, because that also by design creates a situation for conflict. So the kind of balanced environment that you need for community thrivability is to literally segregate that what are those items that every household should be enabled with, and what are those items or what are those commodities or services that should be community pooled. And that is how you create a long-term balance. So it's like, are you familiar with, I forget his name, how can I forget? Will Ruddick's work.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because of you.
Yeah, me because of Tim. So Tim led me into that discussion. So Will talks about this. I mean, if he were to develop a community or a social mobility model, he wouldn't say that here's the pool, everybody dip your hand in this and come back to it. No, he says, all right, here's the pool, one person takes it, and then you start rotating that. So his system also makes sure that there's individual autonomy and independence, yet there's a shared goal, right? So that balance is possibly where our community level governance is going to emerge in the context of energy transition, in the context of just transition frameworks, in terms of migrating from high emission companies and manufacturing units to relatively lower emission, right? So it's so highly nuanced and interconnected that we literally need to start studying, the energy systems of these smaller geographies through these lenses to see what can be done at a local level. How do we become more self-sufficient, self-dependent, and have a healthy exchange? Because that whole extractive, exploitative, that whole trend is there because you've got such large systems against individuals. Right? So the ownership or participation feels daunting. And I think that is the bigger thing that has to be broken down. I'm not a person who understands energy in its chemistry or its physics, to be honest. I understand it as any other product that requires expertise, but is managed exactly the same way like any other commodity. Right? So there are enough and more people who understand the physics and the chemistry behind energy systems. But again, we've packed them up in very transactional mindsets, transactional way of functioning, transactional way of thinking. And I think that is the move that has to happen. It has to become a lot more balanced rather than saying that, hey, so it's like I was mentioning this in the previous session with, when we were talking, Dave, that when you when you start interacting with these people who are the decision makers, you tell them that, do you have the appetite to look at the whole spectrum rather than just have your tunnel vision towards what is the price per kg per hour, because you want to calculate how much profit you're going to make, right? So that whole mindset has to shift. And I personally believe that the tougher the sector, the more the need, and therefore the harder the climb. And this is the toughest sector. It's the hardest climb for this sort of a transition to take place, for this potential future to emerge. Otherwise, I'd like all of us to visualize what's going to happen if we do not look at the second, one second, the second stream on the screen. Let's imagine what would happen if we are not investing in decentralized microgrids, energy as public good, just transition frameworks, still community ownership.
It's a bit like you're saying about the credits for growing trees. So I just let somebody in. Oh, so what's happened here is that this whole tree farming thing and getting credits has taken over other productive farmland in the form of pine trees, because we grow pine trees really fast here.
Mm-hmm.
But in doing so, we're killing the soil and we're creating slash from the trees that are growing on slopey land, which is prone to erosion. So when the trees are cutting down, we get erosion that goes into the rivers and the slash goes into the sea. And so there's a sliding detrimental effect all through the environment. And the reason why the credit scheme is attached to pine trees is it's very easy to calculate the carbon value of a straight pine tree. Whereas if you had a carbon scheme that actually understood the complexity of a native forest or the value of soil or the value of an ocean, you might be inclined to protect those things. But it's too hard. Well, it's posed as being too hard. I'm sure we could work it out, but there's a lot of failures with this whole thing, and a big part of it is thinking that we're actually doing something to help the environment when we're destroying the environment and just pretending.
Yes, agreed. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now. Yeah. So, Chakri, would you be able to come in? I like things that you're pointing us to. We'd like to hear from you a little more. These are so Chakri and I, Dave, we work together. We've got a little energy company that's been formed. We're into consulting, so he's our co-founder. Chakri, can you? Yeah.
Yeah, just briefly, I mean, the primary point to make is when you look at how the brain works or how the energy is generated in the human body, and then we take it to, say, a level of family or a city, it's not the same level of efficiency at which we are creating or using energy. We are cooling spaces we don't use, we're cooling or we're building stuff which is used maybe 10% or 5% of time, for example, the roads or in many of the other structures as well. So I think civilizationally, as a species, we are using and we're building up infrastructure which we don't use. And I think that efficiency is quite poor. I mean, I'm estimating it at about 10 to the power of 15 or 10 to the power of 20 fold excess that we are using. So passive systems are quite used to be quite common in the old days when energy was not ubiquitous, and we seem to have lost it. And I think there could be a lot of energy saving, but also I think the saving is not the right word, because I think when we are misusing energy, like you're talking about the interdisciplinarity of the other systems, all the systems go in overdrive as well. So I just wanted to stay with at this mismatch of how we as a species don't fit, and we are not interdependent with other life on Earth, and that's my primary concern for today.
Thank you, Chakri. In fact, that's absolutely bang on. By the way, one of the recent predictions has been that because fire is going to fall from the sky, in terms of the heat waves, that we've been experiencing all across the globe, our 85% of the energy usage is going to be into cooling spaces. 85% of total energy production is going to go into heating and cooling spaces. So when we are looking at where energy is actually being spent, I think that just calls for revisiting what we are building to spend that energy on. The infrastructure, the kind of infrastructure that we're building. Some of it, of course, I mean, now there's been a little focus in terms of green building councils and, creating norms which are geography specific. But again, the state of the world today has literally put all of that in lock and key. It's no longer fit for use given how we are conducting ourselves these days. That being said, let me just quickly go back to that slide. One second. Let me just, here it goes. So, Alejandra, thank you for coming back. We are having a very interesting discussion about what could be the potential future of energy, and what it looks like in a fragmenting world as we have today. Yeah.
Happy to be here. Thank you.
All right. Right. So again, when I look at this particular thing, energy is public good, I think all the work has to be invested in here so that when this becomes a reality, everything else starts flowing. Everything else starts, fitting in the right space. We're not governments or people, we're not thinking of energy as public good. There is enough and more, fuel or fuel sources available on Earth. How do we tap into it? And we can tap into it when we know for a fact they want to facilitate human thrivability in cities and villages and remotest places of this earth. And Dave, like you mentioned, that because it's cheaper to import, we'll import. We don't want to create new value chains that makes local neighborhoods sustainable and self-sufficient. So it's like we don't want to grow a tree, right? Because it takes time and it's not a fast process. So that whole idea, I know for a fact that this is not a problem of developing technologies or applying technologies. It's literally a problem of intention right now. Like every other problem. Or every other falling institution. So I'd like to again invite some thought here as to how do we facilitate impressing energy for public good in the world, in our spaces, in networks we are connected to with. How would you like to drive this? Aitana is also entered, right?
I feel like there's things we can do in all of our communities, right? I mean, and especially with the relationship between energy and climate. You do have cities now taking more action to do things to help cool the city. That has to do with bringing in more nature into cities. But intention is right. I heard something yesterday. Someone's coming in. And how the great amount of the cooling that would happen if all the roofs were just painted white. right? Like something very simple
Yeah.
to do would have a huge impact globally on warming temperatures. Um, Something else that came up for me. I have a friend in Ukraine, and he said one of the best things that's happened, in terms of all of the infrastructure being destroyed, is how quickly the community has mobilized to begin doing um, individual retrofitting of buildings for solar, and it can happen quickly. And he said that actually in the long run is one of the best things that could have happened. And then the last thing I'll say is that I know in terms of energy usage and manufacturing, by far the most energy is spent on transporting whatever it is that's made. The transportation costs are way higher than the manufacturing costs, which speaks to your idea for local manufacturing, Arti.
There. Brilliant. Thank you for picking on that, Kim. I was actually thinking that, when you look at facilitating or amplifying local manufacturing, automatically your supply chains become a lot easier. And specifically your logistics, right? Because you're servicing, I mean, there are quite a few examples in the world, where that kind of self-sufficiency or that kind of localization has, made those communities reach that self-sufficiency. So one of the classic examples in India is of the Auroville ashram, if anybody's heard of it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so the Auroville was it's one of the most self-sufficient sort of community and one of the first ones in India, more formalized. Otherwise, yeah, at a village level, there is a lot of self-sufficiency. I mean, India is large, really. So,
Yeah.
yeah. So in that sense, when you look at how do you, but the problem is that when something is not done at scale, it doesn't make that kind of money. And if it doesn't make that kind of money, it's not worth doing.
Well, ideas are also being shared, though, that it's not about the money, because a lot of open innovation is going on where people are sharing ideas, and that is how some of these things can be manufactured locally, because the designs are shared
Hmm,
fully.
hmm, hmm, hmm.
Or maybe there's some cost to it, but it's not for profit is not the reason for the existence. And that's like Will Ruddick's, if you remember, Artie, when we the finance innovation
Mm.
dialogue that
Yes.
day, and all of the different all the different people that were there sharing what they're attempting to do in the climate space and the challenges that people are really running up against and financing. I noticed the one design, the one idea that was shared, and when you looked at the graph, it was flowing. It was like nothing stopping it. It was Will Ruddick's, and his was the only one that was not built for profit first. You could see the abundance in it, but so that the profit was a byproduct of a really good design that was for the common good. So that gave me a lot of hope.
Brilliant. And absolutely, Will Ruddick builds a lot of hope for all of us by what he does and the examples he's setting. So let me give you a little example here, a real life example, and let's see what comes out of it. All right. So at COP29, I ended up meeting the environment minister for Nigeria, who sat me down for 2 hours and told me that his rivers are full of plastic. There is no food. The building infrastructure is about 30% is private owned, 70% is government owned. And it has about, I don't know, about like 35 years or no, built in the 1970s and the 80s, right? So that's infrastructure. Then he says there's no healthcare. So I asked him, I said, okay, what is the local source of livelihood there? They said Bonny Island. And Bonny Island is where you have every oil company. So if they draw oil out of that particular island, they're selling it back to Nigeria 10x, almost. Now, that is a situation, that is a story of a lot of countries, a lot of geographies in the world. And that is what I'm speaking to, that how do we, while we're talking about love, we're talking about community building, we're talking about a lot of beautiful stuff that's completely, close to everybody's heart. I don't think so there could be a single person who wouldn't comply with that or agree with that, that this is how we need to go. But when again, when the rubber meets the road, the story changes. And how do we make sure that story doesn't change any longer?
I'll give you another example. Do you want to just allow because I put up a visual on my backdrop.
All right.
I'll get out of the way. You can see it. So after the earthquake in Christchurch that flattened my hometown, they had a competition to design an innovative city village right in the heart of the city that was destroyed. So I brought together architects, Polynesian, Maori, eco-architects, landscape designers, senior engineer from IKEA, all sorts of people. And we spent a week walking on the beach, talking about how people connect um, in an urban environment, a modern urban environment, and looking. I presented some materials, new building materials, compacted hemp, bamboo, blah blah blah, and systems, and we designed this urban village that was based on traditional design that would bring people together. That each pod, which is several stories, would generate more energy than it consumed. And the internal walls could be reorganized at the flick of a switch. There's all of these social systems that went into the design. That also, and what made me think about it was it also accounted for natural airflow and warmth and cooling without consuming a lot of energy. So we did the calculation about the energy that went into the construction and the energy it built. Because we used a lot of recycled materials from broken glass that we turned into lava for foundation, blah, 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 blah. We got into the final 10 out of 1,000 entries around the world. And then we were stopped from being shown to the final judge because we were too innovative for an innovation challenge. That building should be square, not that shape. And it was too Maori for a conservative British city. So doesn't matter what you do, you're, the truth was that the company that was going to win that contract had been decided from the start.
Yeah.
Um,
Great.
so we have to think of, because basically that's why I end up writing Wobbly Town as a children's story, where the children actually end up designing the town. But I guess my point is that we've got the technology and the knowledge and the know-how, but there's this barrier put in front of us that is industry protecting itself.
Yeah.
And it turned out that the minister who was in charge of this happened to be the largest landlord in the city. So he was protecting his own interest. So we have corruption here as well.
Yeah. And I
To
think
deal
this
with
is yeah, Dave, I mean, that's possibly the most common situation in the energy sector everywhere, that the land is first acquired, and once you acquire that land itself, then there's nothing that can sort of bring you down, or everybody has to agree to what you're doing and what you want to do, right? So most of these energy companies, or even government ministries, they also have these informal sort of connections, and they sort of put pressure on the populations based on that. Yeah. Yes, Alejandra.
The time.
Oh, yeah. Sorry.
I'm
Oh,
sorry,
thank
it
you.
was me. I was timekeeper. I'm so sorry.
Thank you. All
Sorry,
right.
caught up.
That was sweet
Thank,
of you. All right.
Thank
Thank you so much for this hour and contributing to it. And lovely to have some of you back on the stream. Thank you.
Thank
That
you.
went so fast compared with our time before.